Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's really good to see some familiar faces in the room. If we haven't met yet, I'm Rihanna Archie from Sustainable Choice Group, the marketing manager. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm joining from today. I acknowledge the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I want to acknowledge their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. I acknowledge that this land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. All right, so I want to get started with something I think a lot of people in this room are dealing with because I hear about it often. Most organizations have set targets now, whether that's because of regulation, because you have to, because of pressure up and down the supply chain, or even just your own internal motivation to be a part of the solution. So we've got net zero, emissions reductions, supply chain commitments. All that part is sort of done and decided, or at least most companies know what goals and targets that they're aiming for in the near future. But where people get stuck or they hit roadblocks is often because it's all really new. Sustainability being a part of business as usual isn't really the norm just yet, as much as it feels like it might be the norm for us because we're all very deep into it. It isn't always just something that people can get on board with. So we get lots of questions on how do we deliver this huge plan? Who owns it internally? What gets funded now and what gets pushed out to next year's budget? And then sometimes we even get to talking about things like what budget do we even allocate this to? Because we don't have a sustainability budget per se. So does this go to marketing or does this come out of another budget within the business? And that's exactly what today is about. We're not going to talk about setting the targets or all the theories behind it and which one to choose and what fits, but what to do after that point. Because there's a gap that shows up in almost every organization, and Jodi is an absolute pro who's going to walk us through how we push through this gap and keep it all moving. So today is going to be really practical. We're going to get into how to move from targets into action, how to prioritize, what to do first, how to bring the right people along, and how to keep things moving when budgets and priorities might start getting some pushback. So today's goal is simple. We want you to leave this session knowing exactly what deserves your attention in the next year to 10 years, and how do we keep pushing that progress boulder uphill. So just a quick run through of how the session works before we jump in for anyone who's new. Jodi's going to take us through the playbook for around 20 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So drop your questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll come back to them at the end. If you see a question that you thought, I really want that answered too, just give it a like, and that will upload it to the top, and we'll get that prioritized. So now I'll introduce Jodi. Jodi is the founder and managing director of Tamarack Consulting. She spent over 15 years working across global consulting firms and in-house with Australian organizations. So she's seen sustainability really from all sides. She's also a chartered accountant with a background in science, which means she brings both the commercial lens and the technical understanding, and she seems to be a jack of all trades. So if you've ever found yourself sitting there thinking, we've set the targets, but now what? You're in good hands with Jodi. So I'm going to hand over to her now.
Great, thanks, Rihanna, and good morning to everyone. I would also like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands that we're meeting today. For me, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. So thanks everyone for joining me after the long weekend to talk about getting started on your climate targets. So first, a little bit about Tamarack. We're a sustainability consultancy, as Rihanna mentioned, of Big Four consultancy side and in-house delivery side. And we're really focused on making decisions and strategies that make sense for your specific business needs. Being sat on both sides of the table, I've really come across and seen, reuse of the same strategies for different businesses, and they don't quite fit. And for a strategy to really work in a business and add value as it should, it needs to be tailored to your specific needs. So that's enough about me. So you've set your targets, and whether you've gone through the rigorous onerous process of validated science-based targets or you've set it outside of any framework, you've likely had to still go through your senior leadership team and your board, and they're going to expect progress. And while it's great having a long-term goal, and that's really, really important in guiding how decisions are made, what can you be doing today, this month, this quarter, to really start getting those wins and feel like you're making some progress? In my experience in rolling out these strategies, I find it important to consider three things. First, the viability. Can we really do it? There's a big difference between swapping out some light bulbs and upgrading an entire fleet to electric vehicles in the near term. So start having to think about the different reduction opportunities and maybe making some high level estimates around the magnitude that of emissions reductions that they might deliver, just to kind of guide you on where you get started. Next is around affordability. Do you have the budget for it? And if you don't have the budget today, what can you be doing now to ensure there are funds for you moving forward? Something like, reduction opportunities will lead to overall reductions in operating costs. So can you negotiate the use of the net savings to be reinvested into future opportunities? Kind of thinking a bit differently. Some of the main things to consider when you're thinking about the overarching budget, and you won't have the answers to all of this straight away. They'll build it over time, but think about the different expenses. There's not just going to be the installation costs. There might be some membership or data subscriptions that you need to sign up to, consultancy costs, the ongoing maintenance and repairs. Maybe if it's a really novel idea, some of the research and development costs, and then potentially resourcing costs for any extra people that you need to employ to help really push the initiative forward. But there's the other side where there's a lot of savings that will come through some of these opportunities. So the energy, water, waste management costs that you might be looking to reduce based on whatever reduction initiative you've put in place. And there might be a reduction in repairs and maintenance if you're upgrading equipment, for example, and then potentially a reduction in labor costs if something's now automated rather than manual. There's also the consideration of the funding options available. So there's commercial funding, green sustainability linked loans. I'm sure most of us have heard about. Some banks even have funding that's specific for energy efficiency upgrades. Then the government at the federal level have the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, and they do research and development funding for new projects. And then the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, which provides the debt and equity once you're ready to break ground on those projects. You could also structure service agreements in ways that would support your initiatives. So lease arrangements or energy performance contracts or even power purchase agreements. And then there are state and federal government grants and rebates that I've found have really helped kind of trigger that next step in terms of getting something over the line and really improving the payback of a certain project. And then the third is practicality. So how do you implement those reduction opportunities? It's really important to make sure you're working with the right teams early, operations, facilities, maybe procurement, because they'll provide those practical inputs needed to understand what's really possible. We had a great emissions reduction opportunity come up in one of my clients, and just switching out from gas boilers to electric heat pumps was going to make a significant improvement in terms of the emissions profile. And, there wasn't space inside, but that was fine because there was lots of space outside. And once you started exploring it a bit further, we came to understand that it was heritage listed, so outside didn't work. So sometimes the opportunities in practice take a bit longer and a bit more consideration to actually be able to put them in place. So just make sure you're talking to those people to really get them on board and engage more broadly across the organization. So you want to really find your sustainability champions. You'll need support from many different teams and people at varying levels to really get things moving forward. And it doesn't really matter the mix of the allies that you've combined. It's good that they have some level of decision-making power. And you really want to make that ask super clear of them, and linking the outcomes to the broader business strategy or KPIs really helps to ensure progress is being made. But I found in my experience, the real driver of making progress is finding the doers. Any level, any team, there's always someone who has this uncanny ability to just get things done. I'm thinking like Red and Shawshank Redemption. they've been there for a while, they know the systems and processes, and they know how to navigate through that complexity and just move things forward. And these people are really, really critical. But the good news on all of this is I've found people are often looking for opportunities to work in the sustainability space across the business and willing to kind of go a bit further in their day jobs to contribute to initiatives. So it's a combination of finding those people that really are passionate about it to help you drive your message as well. So keep an eye out for them. And then the all important leadership commitment. So once you found the right people to engage with, you need to make sure that the leadership team is on board so that they can be freed up to participate, outside of their BAU, because sustainability initiatives are still often seen as an add-on. You want to make sure the leadership really understands that value that's coming through these projects. There's a number of ways, obviously, that you can influence a leadership team. I've personally found coming through a risk management lens has had the highest success for me. And that's not to say that you're selling doom and gloom or anything like that. I always try to frame it from more of a positive point of view. So in terms of that risk management approach, a lot of these initiatives create resilience against future shocks. And so that's really going to support your business and being able to operate moving forward when you're thinking about things like climate in your business decisions. Maintaining good governance and integrating sustainability related projects and initiatives will make sure you're keeping on top of the dynamic regulatory landscape that we're all experiencing in this space. And then, of course, maintaining the strategy aligned action plan will make sure that the initiatives that you're implementing will build towards those broader business goals. And that really creates efficiency along the way as well. So once you have your leadership buy-in, then you want to create some cross-functional magic and set up a working group. Through all of this, it's really critical to get the right mix of organizational functions. So you have people from different levels and different spaces, but then you kind of need to take a look and say, okay, is there anything missing? Different teams can be linked to sustainability related initiatives that you wouldn't necessarily think of off the top of your head. So it's really important to carefully consider who should be involved. Finance is an obvious one, from a data perspective, from a reporting perspective, and operations, facilities will support that on-ground action. But consider other teams like risk and legal. Could they be providing that extra support to ensure that things are being done in the right way, or to demonstrate how a project creates that resilience to the broader business? Procurement have a lot of power in terms of who you're doing business with. And they often are some of those people that really understand those processes that will help unlock some of that momentum. There's also the commercial and sales team. I had a lot of interaction with my sales teams previously, just giving them kind of educational updates around different concepts and things in carbon and climate, so that when they were talking to some of their more sophisticated clients and customers, they could have those conversations and make sure that they were able to deliver on their targets when there were more sustainability focused clients that they were dealing with. HR and health and safety are super important as well, making sure people considerations are incorporated. And then marketing and comms will want to be across the process to facilitate storytelling along the way, both internally and externally, particularly at annual reporting time, I've found. But the key to this working group is really making sure that there is that commitment to participate in the initiatives and move things forward. They're not just coming to meet with sustainability every few weeks or months to learn about what sustainability is up to. You got to make it a bit collaborative rather than directive. So you're not telling them what to do, but you need to make sure that they know that their participation is required to actually make the progress happen. And if people feel like they've had a chance to input on how changes happen, then they'll be more likely to support it anyway. So what gets measured gets managed. People like data. I'm an accountant, as was mentioned, so I'm pro data as a starting point. But it's really key in terms of gaining traction and maintaining momentum. When you attach real figures and stats, then you're really bringing it to life for people. So sometimes you're able to look at, the overarching operating expenses of the business and have a look at the budget for the initiative you're proposing, and it's 0.05% of total operating expenses. And when they see something like that, it really demonstrates just the low cost for the value of what you're trying to achieve. You can also, look at, we're going to reduce or remove this single use item, and it's going to mean that our waste is reduced by X%, or it has this particular impact on the environment. Just something that will bring it to life for people to really see the value of what you're trying to achieve. From my experience, finding the right data and the people who will pull it together is really crucial. And sometimes it's just a matter of understanding where that data sits in your organization. So sometimes it will sit with facilities, sometimes finance has some of it, IT is often involved. So make sure you're looking at all the different systems that you might need to be across, and then find a friend in IT who can potentially make it easier for you to bring that information together from all those different systems. Because I found that data can be sitting in some interesting places, and I'm sure you're all aware, sustainability reporting time, it's a collection of emails and kind of other random reports and things from everywhere and anywhere. So it's good to find someone in IT who can actually understand how they can capture those data points and bring it together. Quick wins can be unexpected. Simple things like HVAC scheduling or ensuring, the right lighting is installed in a new fit out is really important. From my experience in restaurants, we actually had the opportunity to trial different options at new restaurants being built. So we kind of looked at, car stoppers made from recycled materials, solar powered parking lot lights. And then these installations created the data points that facilitated future decisions. So, unfortunately, while it was great that the car stoppers made from recycled materials were reducing waste in one place, they actually had to be replaced way more frequently than the regular ones. So then the overall reduction of waste kind of wasn't there. So, thinking about things like that and testing them is often helpful. And often thinking about the future is really important. So we know that there's an organics mandate, and maybe I don't know how many people are based in other states. I'm in New South Wales. And so there's an organics mandate coming in here. And so it'd be really important for new bills that are going to meet those thresholds to make sure they have a green bin in, and they have the processes to separate organics from the start. In my experience, voluntary regulations often lead to compulsory ones. So making sure that you're considering what future things could be impacting your business are considered up front is really important, because it's really hard to shift entrenched processes. But use your working group to kind of try to keep across any new projects through the business that aren't necessarily sustainability related, and then try to think about ways to incorporate those considerations so that that are really straightforward to implement from the outset, knowing that if we try to do it after the fact, it's going to be much more difficult. Another interesting thing I've come across is the fact that we all know board endorsed sustainability policies and frameworks are not optional. And while it's not your job to be an antagonist, but we do often have to remind people that those policies need to be considered when making their decisions. And it's really the CEO or board who decides if they should not be considered, whether temporarily or otherwise. I once got to the end of the year and I tried to pull together the stats for the sustainability report and going around finding my different data points. And I asked the procurement team to give me the figure of the number or percentage of contracts that were either established or updating using the new sustainable procurement policy. And their answer was, oh, none. We didn't. You gave that to us. That looked great, but we didn't actually look at it or use it in our day-to-day processes. So it's kind of making sure that people understand. It sounds really basic, but kind of having those conversations and having that working group in place really helps that connection and continuation of the momentum. And then, another one now, modern slavery considerations should be incorporated to, the legislation is strengthening, and it's really important to incorporate these considerations to avoid being caught out into the future. This is just a kind of quick and easy basic example of emissions reductions and timeframes. So some of the initial projects that don't take a lot of time or effort, you can still get some reductions, but there could be longer lead projects that drive the biggest changes. You could see something like the introduction of a better waste management system or solar could lead to big changes quickly, particularly when you're looking at something like government rebates that are around that would help with the payback time. So there are, rebates in relation to those organics mandates coming through, or support to help install new equipment. And so it's just understanding what's available around different, broader initiatives in federal and state government too. So maintaining momentum. Often people start with a lot of enthusiasm and momentum, but keeping everyone motivated and timelines on track are really can be quite challenging. One big spanner in the works that I've experienced that Rihanna mentioned is that shift in priorities. Businesses operate in a dynamic environment, and it's hard to avoid those shifts. But when that does happen, the structures you build in up front will help stabilize the group from these kind of broader, for lack of a better word, distractions. So you found the right people, you've set up a working group, you have a cadence for the working group meetings. Maybe it's helpful, depending on how your business operates, to establish terms of reference for the group, to outline clear roles and responsibilities, and maybe tie into some KPIs just to make that connection really clear. You can enhance this stability by establishing a steering committee, just, 3 people maybe, where they have senior level decision-making powers, usually at the exec level, just to help kind of guide and, again, have that tie to the senior leadership decision makers. And you can also keep, this is something that I've experienced a few times, just keep working on things and pulling things together in the background. And kind of the best thing about the sustainability is also the worst thing about the sustainability team is that nobody cares what you're doing sometimes. And so I found that I could just sit there and work on projects that were interesting. And then suddenly somebody needed something. The PR team needed a good news story, or the sales team had a new customer demand and they needed something sustainability related. And I could just be like, oh, here you go. This is something that, we've been working on, and finally it gets funding to get up and running. And so sometimes it's just a matter of persevering on your own and trying to figure it out. And then one day somebody taps you and says, hey, we need something. What do you got? And you can actually be prepared for some of those on-demand requests. There's also the issue of money, obviously. So there are different ways that I outlined before to find money if your budgets are reduced or removed. There's also, can it be included as part of another project? And again, that's where that working group really becomes helpful in terms of keeping everyone across the different things that are operating through the business and helping them think more deeply about how sustainability can be considered across different projects that they're working on. Like the example I shared before, testing alternatives at new sites is a really useful one. And then again, keeping track of those state and federal grants is really, I found, helpful in getting something over the line, just giving it that last little push. Do remember to celebrate success with the group as you go. So even before the emissions start coming down, you can see the achievements that you get along the way. So you've collected X% of data that's required, or every time a process is done differently because of what you and the group are working towards. Every little step counts. And so it's really important to remember where you've come from rather than how far you still need to go, because particularly when that target is so far into the future. And I guess the last question is how do I get started? So first, think about what you can do. Have a conversation with facilities or the operations lead. Can you be researching some of the potential emissions reduction opportunities and bring it to the next working group meeting? One of the more interesting ones that I've come across is, what are the local universities doing that might help? Some of them have MBA programs that are looking at incorporating ESG. Some have specific projects or novel research that they're working on that might tie into something that you're doing, depending on the industry your business is in. And then I feel like now I've said it too many times, but the state and federal grants, just keep looking for those and seeing how, finding ways of how they can tie into your business and really help you get started. Then look at that gap between the target that was committed to and the current level of funding going towards it, and think about ways to bridge that gap over time, considering some of those more novel funding sources that we talked about earlier. And then next, have short-term goals. Again, to demonstrate your success along the way. Don't beat yourself up. It's going to be hard. I know from experience that the say to do ratio is often lacking when it comes to sustainability initiatives and budgets. Every win, however small, is important. So just make sure you're reminding yourself of that as you hit roadblocks along the way. And then, of course, find your friend in finance to help get the information that you need to succeed. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jodi. I have a couple of questions I'll start myself with since the chat's a bit quiet. Um, you're talking about early on about bringing cross-functional teams like marketing, sales, HR, everyone on board. And I'm constantly preaching about this and about breaking down silos. So it's great to hear it from someone who's actually gotten projects across the line, preaching it too. Um, I guess I'm wondering, what's the easiest way that you have found to get those teams engaged early without it feeling like, oh, this is just another tick box initiative? Or I guess, have you found success in like how you pitch those initiatives and how that works best?
Yeah, no, good question. And I kind of that was part of the thinking when you're thinking through those different teams is what motivates them. For some people that we had on the working group, as I said, they were the different working groups I've come across. They've just been excited to help. They were interested in it and wanted to do something. So there's that bucket of people. There are others that come on as a development opportunity. So that's where you're talking to the leadership team and really understanding, how we can pitch this and get people involved. Some of them came from that side of, oh, I really want to challenge myself to learn broader topic area around, my part of the business. And so that was a really good motivator. And then often, it would come through the regulatory side of things, where, they kind of had to, but not really. But marketing and usually marketing, sales, HR, they're always just kind of enthusiastic and ready to kind of jump on board and get involved. And then it's just really demonstrating the link between the sustainability or the emissions reduction initiatives, the climate target with that specific team. So going in with an example and a really clear request of what you need from them is really helpful to kind of help them sort it out in their heads what they are bringing to the table and why they're there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess sort of like mapping it from an overall strategic goal of the business and mapping that down to each department, because those doers and those allies, like they want to be a part of making change because they want to feel good and get
Yeah.
recognition as well. So yeah, that makes total sense. I selfishly have another question for you before I get into the chat quickly. Um, I was wondering, part of what you were talking about getting data and how you present it to people and externally and all of that. So I started thinking about that sort of iterative, test fast, stages and gates approach that's often used in startup culture. And I'm wondering if you have ever thought about if that could be really useful in sustainability work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were running the carbon strategy for one of the airlines, we did some of that testing actually. We did compared it, this message in a tree versus that message in a koala. Do they tick the carbon offset box, for example, and tried to run those in short time frames to try to build the information to be able to go in one direction or another. And that was really helpful to help us guide, where we wanted to kind of put our efforts and things in terms of the customer side of that. And yeah, I think that's where the IT team, depending on your business size and how they work and how busy they always are, they usually are pretty enthusiastic in finding solutions and helping find ways to bring that data together. So finding somebody that has that connective brain and building puzzles together in the IT team to bring the data, different points of data together, I found really helpful as well.
Awesome. All right, I will get into chat questions now. So if anyone else has questions, feel free to add them now and I'll get to them. We have a first question. This has been really insightful. I'm responsible for ESG in a clothing company. They want me to take the distraction away from the rest of the business. I don't know if I can ask to take time from multiple people in the business. Any tips on how I can talk to the boss about building a team?
Ooh, that's a good question. And I guess it would depend on your size, the size of your business as well. And I wonder if there's a way of going about it. I've had to before kind of, it took a while to set up the working group because of that kind of thing. It was a pretty lean organization. And so you kind of dropping it in with people and testing to see if who's interested or what might be interested, and then kind of really demonstrating that not to a lack of your skills or abilities, but just like you need something, you need information from them or data from them in order to inform the decisions that you'll be leading and the initiatives that you'll be pulling together. And so kind of using that angle as an information, I guess, source versus potentially, and then moving forward, kind of creeping towards that. Oh, look, we talk all the time. How about we make that a formal arrangement and kind of build on that? And maybe it starts as a really small cohort of people, and you're just kind of getting information from them, and then you've realized that they kind of light up when they get to participate in sustainability stuff. So then you start asking for a bit more, and just kind of the snowball rolls from there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Just asking for a little bit of forgiveness when
Yeah.
you make some progress along the way. We have another question in the chat. Do you have any tips for changing the view of on the road sales teams about moving into EVs?
Ooh, that's a really great question. I have an EV and I love it. On the road sales teams are, it's a challenge in terms of that. I guess kind of truth, but you can work around it of that long distance. So I guess depending on how far they're traveling, is that conversation. And I don't know if hybrids would be an option, or if there are there would be maps out there, presumably. Can you build something that kind of aligns to their sales route and kind of take that pain out of their hands and be like, look, these are the different charging, fast charging stations along your way, and kind of start to help them think about different ways of working. So while your EV is charging, can you be compiling the notes from the last conversation you were just having, and preparing for the next conversation that you're going to have, and then you hop back in the car and go to the next spot. So it's dependent without knowing the distances you're traveling. There are ways that you can try to just help them understand that it's not going to be a pain for them. So that's generally how, even putting on a pool cover to help reduce the electricity use for heating the pool was a big ask. And so just it's that change in process that sometimes is a little bit sticky. And so it's just giving them solutions to kind of their any issues that they throw up at you. So that, and again, finding one or two people who can kind of be your champions as well, to be like, oh, Julia over here, she really loves her EV and this is the experience she's had. And so kind of test it with somebody if that's an option, to then prove the point that, they were able to still have successful, sales days driving around. They just kind of structured how they did it slightly differently.
Do you, in addition to that, do you find that there are certain reports or resources or ways that you approach finding someone that's done this successfully, or is it sort of doing the calculations internally that works best, or is there research you can do to help present that, that this isn't as big of a problem as you think it might be?
Yeah, you can. I found it usually better to have the, you know, entity specific information for people because it gives them less of an opportunity to find issue with it. So, route isn't the same as mine, or that's a different, state and or
Yeah.
that's a different industry. And so you can find information out there just, with some research online, but I find it more helpful if you have specific data points that you can use. Even if it's finding somebody, in the finance team who has if they do kilometer allowances and things like that, like you can find different points of data in different parts of the business and then try to kind of cobble together some estimates around what it could look like in practice. I found that's a bit, and that could just be my finance background coming through, but that's that's generally my approach, because they can find fewer issues in it because it's directly related to what the business is doing.
Yeah, I think that's really practical and probably an easier sell across all the teams too, because they can feel like it relates to them and
Yeah.
the numbers have been crunched by someone they trust. All right, I'm going to get to a couple more questions. We talk a lot about goal setting in ESG. The issue is that sustainability goals can be 5 to 10 years away. Many of them never get reached. How do you recommend setting goals for the steering committee? Is it easier to do in 3, 6, 12-month milestones?
Yeah, definitely. And really break it down probably to more steps than you think is necessary because people really like to see those kind of momentum going forward and progress being made and, using little thermometer things around proportion of data captured or whatever kind of visuals people like to see. But I think really breaking it down to the specific steps, in terms of that implementation plan would really help kind of make sure the momentum isn't lost, when um, some they feel like something hasn't been achieved, and then you can go back and say, okay, no, look, we've actually done, these 12 different things that are bringing us that few steps towards this goal. And yes, that goal is way out into the future, but this is taking X% of it or something, trying to demonstrate those gradual changes is really helpful in the shorter term.
Yeah. We have another question, and I sort of have something that tacks on to it. The question is, do you have any tips for what you should do if key initiatives fall behind schedule?
That's kind of standard. So it's basically, I don't think I was just trying to think of a time where they were on schedule. Yeah, no, it's that one's a challenging one, but if you can point to, and I think that kind of comes back to the progress made. If you can point to the fact that you've all been trying and working towards it, and even document when, and I'm an ex-auditor, apologies, but I really, documentation and evidence is very important. And so if you kind of have those touch points where you're like, well, we did get up to this point and achieve that step, but we didn't make it to the next step because XYZ happened. And then you can really, you have the full story of what's going on, and it's not just making excuses. You can point to actual things that happened that, the shift in priority might have delayed things. And so this team specifically was focused on, this supply chain shortage during that 3 months. And so that's kind of knocked this back a bit because they were very focused for that time or something, anything that just demonstrates the kind of why rather than you just kind of making excuses, I think is really helpful in selling that story.
Totally. And I guess it's probably a lot about being agile and just
Yes.
making sure that if and when things go wrong, it's like building a new house or a construction project. If and when there are roadblocks, you have to sort of figure out how to pivot around them. And with changing regulation, the way it changes so fast here,
Yeah,
it's always going to be a thing, I guess.
absolutely.
Awesome. I have another question here. Do you have any examples of consumer brands who have set up a working team successfully? It would be easier to pitch the ideas I have if I could share an example.
Sure. So in all the businesses I've worked for, they're pretty high profile brands. We've set up internal working groups within all of them. So that's Guzman y Gomez, Challenger, and Virgin Australia are the three corporates that I led sustainability teams in over the last decade or so. And all three had that mix and collection of individuals that I mentioned. And even, in a place like Virgin, we were able to then establish the Sustainability Ambassadors Program, which was our crew members. They got a special pin that they got to wear on their uniform. And they were delightful. They constantly, the main thing, and sorry, I'm gonna bore you with some aviation things now, but the main thing on the aircraft is weight. For every whatever amount of weight you put on, there's extra fuel that needs to be burned in order to move the aircraft. So stripping weight off the aircraft was a huge thing. And so we had all of these crew members that were working in the aircraft day in, day out, knew everything that was in there. And they were constantly coming up with great ideas for how to reduce the excess, for lack of a better term, on the aircraft. And they were really enthusiastic. And so it kind of led to that broader engagement piece. And, it was again an application to get to be a sustainability ambassador, so that you couldn't just kind of sign up to it and say you were involved and then never participate in anything. But that kind of came off the back of a broader business working group where we were pushing towards some regulatory change and forming some initiatives through that. And then the crew kind of representative as part of that then brought it up as a really great opportunity, because I think they were maybe overwhelmed with the amount of input they were getting from their crew when they kind of tried to gather it all. So we formed this extra group of people who were really participating. I don't know if that helps or answers your question at all, but all three businesses I saw push towards different things: modern slavery, TCFD, and the ASRS reporting as well.
Sort of like getting that buy-in, but then also that accountability step in it. I think that's probably really, really good advice. Getting people, because everyone can just raise their hand, I guess, but actually having that accountability in it is probably a good way to keep progress going.
Yeah, and that was definitely a learning. I didn't know all of this from the beginning. So you kind of have 3 or 4 meetings and nobody's really contributing to the conversation, or they're not taking it away and bringing it to their team. And then we kind of had to shift. And that's where I mentioned the terms of reference and getting that in place, so people really understood, no, this isn't just a kind of listen session for you to understand what sustainability initiatives are happening. It's for you to help move them forward. So that was definitely something that I found along the way.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Can I just jump in and ask a question? Sorry,
yeah,
I was looking for the raise hand button, but I can't find it. This is really interesting, Jodi, really practical. I appreciate it. We talk to people a lot about what's hard, and there's a lot of pushback internally. It depends on where you work, right? But one of the big things that we've noticed probably in the last 6 months is that even the naysayers, even the ones that are saying, oh, no, our customers don't want it yet, or we don't have money for it, they've noticed, everybody seems to be noticing the staff care. The staff want to work for organizations that have a sustainability plan in place. They're more engaged when the organization is such. And I was just wondering if there is almost an employee engagement angle here where because I can see in the chat the questions around, how do I pitch this? Everybody feels like they have to pitch it. I know the person who's responsible for that apparel brand, and I know what that organization is like. And it's very much I've put you in this, I'm paying you to take this away. So I get it. But I'm just wondering about if there is an employee engagement approach here that you've seen where it's actually like, you know what, if you're not going to do it for the environment, and if you don't think your customers care, here's the employee engagement stats, or here's what will make your people feel better. Have you seen it approached like that before?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was something that we looked at as well. I would interrogate the recruitment team on how many of the candidates were asking questions about the sustainability strategy of the business in the interview process. Or we also included questions in the annual engagement survey, or however frequently your business does an engagement survey, and included questions around, different angles of it. How do you think we're doing? Do you think we should be doing more? Do would that kind of be something that's important to you? Like that, those kind of questions around, either you can split it out. It just usually you don't have a lot of space on the survey to add a lot of things, so it tends to be kind of condensed together. But if you could split topics out, even that's even better in terms of the, how much community engagement should we have versus, engagement around the environment and climate.
That's a really interesting approach, is to put it into the employee engagement survey, because that's something that is inexpensive to do and can give some real clarity to leadership.
Yeah.
So I've written that down. I'm going to share that with a couple of people particularly. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Awesome. I'm going to read one more question from the chat before we wrap it up. When you spoke early on today about budgets and costs versus savings, is there any sort of framework or way of thinking or presenting these sort of finance aspects in senior leadership that seems to work best to really boost buy-in? I guess you're the pro on this, coming from a finance background too.
Yeah, it's there. You could use a framework, and we have ones that we've developed. But again, and this is now, I feel like an annoying response, but it's kind of, what does your business do? Because I find that if I've gone in and presented something in a certain way that's worked for me before, it's not necessarily going to land, because they're used to seeing the figures or the way it's presented in a specific way. And so if it exists, or if it's possible to find how that type of thing is presented in the business more broadly for other projects, and then filling it in that way, usually is more helpful. But there are definitely different ways that you can do it, in terms of just kind of having the standard, the developing a marginal abatement cost curve, for example, where you're looking at the cost and versus the amount of emissions you're abating, to help support those decisions on what gets done next. But that's a much more detailed analysis, and something that you'd be kind of developing over the next 12 months versus having up front to get started.
Yeah, awesome. And Karen has another question, so you can unmute.
Sorry, me again. I'm thinking, because I know a lot of the names in this chat, and I talk to these people every single day, and I know what the challenges are. And one of the big things that's coming up at the moment is the uncertainty around regulation, and things like digital product passports are up in the air. They're coming, but there's all these, no one's finalized anything. The packaging laws, they're coming, but nobody's finalized anything. There's the climate reporting. It doesn't affect us yet, or it may never affect us. So there's all of these, like, we'll push it to when, we'll wait and see what happens, I'd say, is probably the biggest thing. We've been building a DPP solution, and weirdly, the most interesting pushback we've had is, what if we back the wrong horse? They're like, well, it's too soon to know. And so I'm noticing it all over the place. Is like, even with the packaging laws, let's just wait and see what happens. So how do you recommend approaching the getting around of, let's wait and see what happens? One of the things that I say to people is, when the laws arrive and people need to go out and seek help for it, whether they need to get a DPP solution or they need a consultant or whatever, those people are now going to be highly sought after and very expensive.
Yeah.
So my recommendation is, go earlier. But that sounds like a little bit like a threat, if anything. How do you approach this we'll wait and see what happens vibe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's definitely consistent all around the place in terms of these things. And I've, even before the packaging guidelines, for example, were coming in as a hard regulation, they demonstrating, and there are other examples of this, health and safety is kind of started where sustainability is maybe was a few years ago, and so looking at the different elements of those types of things that have come from a, well, maybe it's that way for you, from a place of kind of voluntary, and then it generally becomes compulsory in my experience. And something like the packaging legislation, even the modern slavery considerations, started out in the human rights, and then it came in the UK, and we were kind of watching that, and then it got introduced in Australia, and now they're making it even more rigorous. So it's finding those different demonstrations. The TCFD turned into the ASB. Like you can show how previously voluntary things became mandatory, and then the challenges, as you say, trying not to bring fear into their hearts, but show how much work is involved in doing all that. I don't think people quite appreciate. And that's again where if you step out, you can kind of gauge the appetite around the business in terms of the level of detail and stepping out what it would take versus condensing it a bit to make it a little more approachable, but really trying to show the different steps that we would need to take as a business in order to get us there, and what that looks like if we condense those timelines, and as you say, have to overpay for this same work. So it's just, and that one's not always easy to sell in terms of, well, we've got this budget now and this thing, and that's kind of where my comment about just working on something quietly in the corner comes in. And sometimes you can progress some things by getting a couple people to help you with this, or testing something is what I found really helpful, and getting those data points by testing it, and any kind of interaction you can have with customers as well. We kind of did a bit of that testing behind the scenes in terms of some customer feedback on some of the initiatives to try to drive some of that, I guess, in progress in the shorter term rather than pushing it down the line. So it's finding those different data points, like you mentioned, the employee engagement, the customer side, just trying to find the information that says, well, it's not, this is going to be regulatory, but actually all these other stakeholders of ours still care now. So it'll be beneficial to just get started.
I think the insight here for me is using examples of things that have previously been voluntary, or the things we're just talking about, things that are in the future. The modern slavery one for me is a really good one because it's very clear. You can see like a lot of these people in these businesses were in business when they was, everyone turned a blind eye to sweatshops. So I think being able to see that has to change, and there's a cost that you can't avoid, is really, really helpful. And I appreciate that. And that question was specifically for me because that's something that I'm dealing with a lot at the moment, is a lot of pushback of like, we'll wait and see what happens. And I think we won't be able to service these clients when the time comes. Like, I don't know what we're going to do. So yeah, cool. I really appreciate the practical approach. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that brings to my mind framing, and it's like all about how we frame everything internally, externally. Like we're always talking about, external messaging and how we frame it to customers and consumers, but internal, to sell the project or keep it moving, is just as important sometimes,
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think we can wrap it up there. We're very close to time. Thank you so much, Jodi. This was a hugely helpful session, and I think it's exactly what I needed after a long weekend. Something really practical and tangible to digest to start my week. Thank you to everyone who joined us as well. These sessions really do work because people show up with real questions and real challenges, and they really are willing to share what's happening inside their own businesses. We'll send through the recording and if you take away shortly. So if you take one thing away from today, I guess what I would hope it would be that you don't have to have the perfect plan. You just have to have some progress and know what you're going to do next, and really get it moving by finding your allies and doers, like Jodi said. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you at the next session.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.